Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Corombos of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Very glad you're with us for the Thursday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Good, bad, crazy martinis for you today. Let's start with the good, and it kind of is a follow-up on a discussion we had a couple days ago about the momentum that Republicans seem to have in some of the really tight Senate races that Democrats had a stubbornly consistent lead in. We still don't see the Republicans bursting through and leading in these, but they're still very, very tight. And so in addition to the fact that Michigan and Wisconsin are now considered toss-ups, Ohio is as well. There's another couple of polls out of Ohio, one from the Washington Post, which shows Sherrod Brown up by just a point over Bernie Moreno. The Marist poll shows it 50-48. Brown over Moreno, so very, very close. Also, the New York Times has done some polling in three critical states. They've got Tim Sheehy up 8 points over Jon Tester in Montana. It's getting late early in Montana. I saw some Democrats on Twitter today suggesting that he's going to lose, but he was a really good senator. So when they're saying that almost a month out, it's probably not a good sign. And then in other New York Times Siena polling, they've got Rick Scott up 9, which is... That's a big lead for anybody, but for Rick Scott, that's exceptionally huge. Marist has it much tighter, a 2-point lead for Rick Scott. And so they also have Ted Cruz up by 4 points, 48-44 against Congressman Colin Allred. Marist has that as a 5-point Cruz lead at 51-46. And so, you know, Florida and Texas still very competitive, but not the dead heats we had seen just a short time ago. And it looks like Bernie Moreno is still right there with Sherrod Brown, and I'm sure these things will fluctuate a little bit more over the next few weeks.
Yeah, again, not the headline that I think any Democrat wanted to see or maybe even expected to see. By the way, the New York Times released its its presidential polling numbers earlier in the week, and there were 3 questions that were withheld for later release. And I looked at that and I said, they polled the Senate races, and I bet you those are not great. And I bet you that's going to be its own separate story. Well, you turn in go over to the New York Times webpage today. Republicans appear poised to take control of Senate, new poll shows. Not what you want to hear if you're a Democrat. And we kind of knew that things were going in this direction. Because of West Virginia, Republicans were looking at a floor of about 50, which means Democrats needed everything to go their way. And Jon Tester is just not getting it done. He's had the wind at his back in the last 3 cycles. His luck has run out. I think the margin that big indicates that, maybe the dam has burst. And that, I can only imagine what it's like to be Senator Tester. You log into Twitter and people are already delivering your eulogy. The sense of, there's still a month to election day. Where's everybody going? So there's that. The other thing is when you're in my business, you are constantly encountering either Democrats or liberal columnists or other folks who are saying, I heard Democrats have a really good shot in Nebraska against Deb Fischer. They actually don't. Or at least, first of all, no one's done it. There's not an independent poll that's been out there. Now, there's a bunch of, polls for this guy, Osborne. By the way, probably the fact that he's the same last surname as the football coach probably helps out there. But again, this is a state Trump's going to win by like 15, 20 points. I just have a really hard time seeing an independent Bernie Sanders supporting candidate beating a Republican in a state like that. Florida and Texas, God, it feels like we go through this every 6 years. These are pretty darn red states. Sometimes Democrats get close. And remember, 6 years ago, Beto O'Rourke did come within 3 percentage points of Ted Cruz. The best that any Democrat had performed in like a generation. But Ted Cruz still won. And at one, famously, Beto O'Rourke then ran for president. Couldn't get anywhere. He was on with, I think, Seth Meyers on NBC Late Night. And he said, where's Ted Cruz when I need him? And Ted Cruz responded on Twitter, in the Senate. Ted Cruz, is Ted Cruz going to have a close race, closer than we're used to seeing Republicans in Texas? Yeah. He's still going to win. And that's what this polling indicated today. And Rick Scott, we joke about how he has to win he's going to win every race by 1 point. I'm actually not that shocked. My colleague Charlie Cook lives down in Florida in the Jacksonville region. He points out the single most important issue in state of Florida is hurricanes. Because it affects everybody. And it's life and death. It is your home. It is your car, your boat, everything you care about, And if you handle hurricanes well, people love you forever. If you botch them, you're out and they'll never forget it. And his sense is that we've had not one but two major hurricanes hit the state. DeSantis is doing great, and every Republican is out there doing what they're supposed to do. So he thinks Republicans are going to have a good, comfortable year in Florida. And again, I'm not going to name names, but you can find liberal columnists who are telling you Ted Cruz is in trouble, and this is the year Florida Democrats are going to win a Senate race. Doesn't look like it's going to happen. By the way, if you haven't voted, go out and vote. If you're a door knocker, keep doing your jobs. Don't count anything as a given. But right now, it still looks extremely likely that we're going to have a Republican Senate, and that makes everything else, the amount of damage that can be done on a whole bunch of other different fronts, greatly mitigated if there's a Republican Senate majority.
Certainly the case, but like you said, a long way to go, so no time to take the foot off the gas. Glad to hear that Milton was not as devastating as once feared. There's still a lot of damage, especially along the Gulf Coast and other places across the state. So prayers continue, because we know there is some loss of life, and we've seen some of the damage as the sun came up today, including the dome where the Rays play. And there's going to be a lot more there. Storm surge, I think, was close to 10 feet, which is, again, not where it was projected, but 10 feet of storm surge can still do a tremendous amount of damage. So thank you to those who are doing the work down there to restore and to rebuild. And I know a lot of folks are just getting their first look at it, and some might not until they get back to the area. Jim, in terms of the politics, it seems like there's a sense that Trump also has the presidential momentum. There's some indication of that in the polls, but it's still very, very tight. I like to get my cues from Doris. That's the lady in my that the Democrats think I am when they send me emails in my inbox. Yesterday, they told me if Doris kicked into the Democrats, that Doris would get a recipe for a hot home-cooked Walls family recipe. There was also one, they were starting to get a little chippy. A few weeks ago, it was, this would be a great time to make your first donation of the cycle. Still not happening. Doris is not sold on the Democrats.
Greg, how much did you have to donate for them to not send you Walz's recipe? I'll pay more. That to me is the better bargain. This whitefish, souffle or something.
That's right. That's exactly right. Oh, goodness. 3 Martini Lunch today is sponsored by BetterHelp. And look, if you're a Republican, you see those polls, your mental health is probably looking up a little bit. And if Democrats, not so much. But seriously, things are tough sometimes. We got high prices. We've got struggles with work and kids and marriages and all sorts of other things happening. And so if you need help beyond, those that you generally turn to for help in those situations, BetterHelp is also an option at betterhelp.com/3ml. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. You can schedule appointments virtually for as often as you like or as rare as you like. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. It's also more affordable than traditional therapy. Take off the mask with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/3ml today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/3ml. All right, Jim, on to our bad martini now. And if we sound like a broken record on this issue, it's probably because we are. And also because neither party cares at all about solving this issue or even meaningfully addressing it. And that's the situation of our national debt. We just got out numbers at the end of this fiscal year here, projecting that this year's federal deficit, not the debt, that's somewhere in the 35 plus trillion range, but just for fiscal year 2024, $1.8 trillion. That means our mandatory payment on the interest on the debt, just the interest, $892 billion in fiscal year 2024. Next year, that's going to go up again, more than $1 trillion just on interest. And if very little is done over the next decade, we're looking at $2 trillion just in interest a decade from now. And that's despite the fact that tax receipts are up. This is, by the way, the work of Josh Rao over at the Hoover Institution, and Veronique DeRougy wrote about it over at the Corner on National Review Online. The numbers on the tax side, according to the Congressional Budget Office, tax receipts up 11% last year, and receipts from the corporate income tax were up 26%. Meanwhile, quote, outlays rose by an estimated $617 billion, or 10%. So, Jim, they keep trying to whistle past the graveyard, but the graveyard's getting louder.
Greg, there was one significant problem with what Veronique Derugi wrote yesterday. It's because I saw those numbers from the CBO and was going to write about it, and she said everything I was going to say. So thanks a lot, Veronique. So one thing that jumps out is that imagine, if you ran the numbers and you found out that in the fiscal year, I know having a fiscal year 3 months off from the calendar year messes people up. We joked about fiscal new year to everybody on October 1st. But let's face it, in a year, you made 11% more than last year. You'd probably be feeling pretty good. That's considered a pretty good return on the investment. A lot of people don't get a 10% raise every year. You'd be looking for it. If you did it and you still spent so much more that you were even deeper in debt, then you would know you had a serious, spending problem. Same true if it was applied to your business, same applied to your household finances, anything, right? I mean, like if you got more money coming in and you still can't keep up with it, then you're really, it's utterly out of control. The other thing that jumped out, and it was really kind of unnerving, look, I know God, what's the old joke about, the woman who always shows up at this, the economic projections, sweet woman named Rosie Scenario. She always is telling you how great things are going to be, So I know everybody kind of figures that economic projections generally assume really good economic growth and they assume things are going to go great. Well, the number that jumps out here is the recognizing that not only with the deficit was 1.8 trillion last year. In 2021, post-COVID, it's not like you're like, oh, it's 2019. We have no idea that this global pandemic is going to come along and wreck the economy and make everybody stay home and rack up these massive expenses that nobody could have foreseen. 2021, they expected it was going to be $905 billion. So they missed it by roughly $900 billion. That's really bad. Their estimate was half of what it actually was. 2021, it's Biden administration. It's not, there were different folks over there who were more cautious in their projections or something like that. So if you can miss by nearly $1 trillion, that is a sign that every projection coming out here from here on out could be a dramatic underestimation of how bad it's going to be. We have a 5-alarm fire of debt and the deficit in this country. Spending is wildly out of control. We don't have a problem with tax revenue. It's not, like the argument, a lot of Republicans are not saying we're in recession. We're not technically in recession. I get why people might say it feels like a recession because you can't buy as much as you used to because of high cost of living, inflation, and stuff like that. But we're technically not in a recession. And if people are paying more in tax revenue, then it should be a sign that the economy is going well. But we still can't keep up with spending because we're spending so much. But nobody wants to talk about this. Hey, it's a month before Election Day. Why should anybody be talking about the deficit? And the
Yeah, why should anybody care about that? Nobody's talking about entitlement, even tweaking entitlements, much less anything else. And you can't deal with the debt unless you're going to address entitlements. Instead, we're talking about new entitlements. Remember the vice presidential debate and how much we're going to pour into childcare and all that sort of thing. And so they just don't get it. And they always think the bill won't come due.
For purpose of the federal government is to fluff the pillows. And just make, every problem in your life, the federal government must rush in and take care of that for you. Oh, and by the way, you shouldn't have to pay back any student loans.
Right. Exactly right. So, again, everybody just keeps pretending it's not happening, but it is happening and the bill's going to come due. All right, let's talk about Z-Biotics, because if you're, familiar with numbers and you can see how this thing is spiraling out of control, I can understand wanting to have some adult beverages. But before you do that, take Z-Biotics. I promise you, your next morning will go a whole lot better if Z-Biotics is your first drink.
Z-Biotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. Scientists invented it to tackle your rough mornings after some drinking. Now, here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in your gut. And it's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next morning. Z-Biotics pre-alcohol produces an enzyme that breaks this byproduct down. So just remember to make Z-Biotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, as always, and you will feel your best the next morning.
Go to zbiotics.com/3ml to get 15% off your first order when you use 3ml at checkout. Z-Biotics is backed with 100% money-back guarantees, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Visit zbiotics.com/3ml and use the code 3ml at checkout for 15% off. Thank you, Z-Biotics, for sponsoring this episode and our good times.
If you haven't learned your lesson yet, never rely on the federal government. The Watchdog on Wall Street podcast with Chris Markowski. Every day, Chris helps unpack the connection between politics and the economy and how it affects your wallet. After another FEMA fallout, while Mayorkas shopped at designer stores, at some point we need to eliminate it and outsource it to the private sector while using the military like we did for Katrina. Whether it's happening in D.C. or down on Wall Street, it's affecting you financially. Be informed. Check out the Watchdog on Wall Street podcast with Chris Markowski on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast.
All right, Jim, on to our crazy martini now. A triple-fisted crazy martini, which isn't really even anatomically possible, but nonetheless, no good deed goes unpunished. We said nice things about 60 Minutes earlier this week, which is obviously a CBS product, but CBS literally has 3 controversies raging right now, all of which completely avoidable. So let's start with the one that's been going on for a number of days now, and that's the issue with Tony DeCopel. He is one of the hosts of the CBS morning show, and one of his guests on October 7th, mind you, Monday, was Ta-Nehisi Coates, who has this new book out about the Middle East, and let's just say it's not kind to Israel. And so in addition, as you can tell in the beginning comments here, DeCopel doesn't necessarily think that negatively of Coates on the whole, but he does throw some challenging questions at him about what's not in this book. And here's a sample of this, thanks to the Free Press for highlighting this clip.
Why does Ta-Nehisi Coates, who I've known for a long time, read his work for a long time, very talented, smart guy, leave out so much? Why leave out that Israel is surrounded by countries that want to eliminate it? Why leave out that Israel deals with terror groups that want to eliminate it? Why not detail anything of the first and the second intifada, the cafe bombings, the bus bombings, the little kids blown to bits? And is it because you just don't believe that Israel in any condition has a right to exist?
So, fair questions, right? Well, apparently some staffers at CBS didn't like this, so they had a massive staff conference call where the higher-ups are saying, "Oh, I understand your concerns here. It's been addressed." So basically, DeCopel got a dressing down for asking tough questions. Then you've got the 60 Minutes interview itself. Still, credit to Bill Whitaker. I'm sure he's not the one who edited this, because he did ask some pretty tough questions of Kamala Harris and good follow-ups. But the way this was edited is insane. The question's about Israel, and here is the original answer.
But it seems that Prime Minister Netanyahu is not listening.
Well, Bill, the work that we have done has resulted in a number of movements in that region by Israel that were very much prompted by or a result of many things, including our advocacy for what needs to happen in the region.
You got that? Was that clear? No, of course not. Here's what actually got edited down to from CBS.
But it seems that Prime Minister Netanyahu is not listening.
We are not going to stop pursuing what is necessary for the United States to be clear about where we stand on the need for this war to end.
Now, editing happens all the time. You do it for time, you do it for, staying on point and all that stuff. But apparently that response wasn't even to that question. And so that's part of the controversy as well. And finally, Jim, also thanks to the Free Press on this, in late August, Mark Memmott, the Senior Director of Standards and Practices at CBS News, sent an email to all CBS News employees reminding them to, quote, be careful with some terms when we talk or write about the news from Israel and Gaza. One of the words on Memmett's list of terms was Jerusalem. Of Jerusalem, Memmott wrote, quote, do not refer to it as being in Israel, unquote. He continued in a note sent to thousands of journalists at the network. Yes, the U.S. Embassy is there, and the Trump administration recognized it as being Israel's capital, but its status is disputed. The status of Jerusalem goes to the heart of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Israel regards Jerusalem as its eternal and undivided capital, while the Palestinians claim East Jerusalem, occupied by Israel since the 1967 Middle East War, as the capital of a future state. So, Jim, you could point out that it's disputed, certainly, but it's pretty clear where the government is and where the U.S. Embassy is and everything else. CBS just stepping on rakes all over the place.
Listeners, to give you a perspective of just how bad a week it has been for CBS, Greg said to me, we got to talk about the 3 controversies involving CBS News this week. And I thought you were going to talk about a 4th one, Greg, which was that so far CBS News has released a transcript of the 60 Minutes report, meaning including the narration and all that stuff. It has not released a verbatim transcript of Kamala Harris's interview with Whitaker.
Right.
All right. Now, very often, I can think of a few cases where I don't remember that transcript ever being released. One of them was Biden's interview with Stephanopoulos in the aftermath of during Afghanistan. And remember, that was 4 or 5 days ago. And I was like, wow, that really looks bad. What did they leave on the cutting room floor? And as far as I know, there was never a complete... Again, ABC News released, here's what aired. They did not release, this is it. Now, I went back and I checked. Because, first of all, every press conference, every speech, every back and forth with reporters on the way to Marine Force One, all of that gets transcribed by the White House. Also, everything with the vice president as well gets transcribed. It gets put up on whitehouse.gov, right? This is going back. You can go back, and I went around. Everything Dick Cheney ever did was up there, including interviews, right? Now, maybe some of them were live radio interviews, so it was a little bit easier to transcribe. But it was one of those things where, for the purposes of history, everything that is said by a president or vice president gets put up there so people can go back and review it and say, what did they say about this sort of thing? As far as I know, as of this recording, CBS has not released the complete transcript of her interview, which, in light of the editing, seems really important right now. What did she actually say in response to all these questions? The transcript would clear this up. They haven't released that, which is which makes people very, very suspicious that what did she actually say? All right, try to take all this in order. Greg, I'm not going to say that Ta-Nehisi Coates is wildly overprotected, but after that interview, Tom Brady said, "Come on, ref, let him play. You got to let him hit him like that." Or Patrick Mahomes, for those who can't stand the Chiefs right now. Like that was a tough but fair question. Oh, by the way, when you're an author, that's kind of the stuff you want, right? It's you want people to take your book seriously. You want them to chew it over, and you want them to try to poke holes in your argument. That's what this is supposed to be. Clearly, the environment, somebody made an observation. Ta-Nehisi Coates has been, somebody made the argument, arguably the most prominent public intellectual in American life over the last 7-8 years. He got one tough interview, and CBS News is being shocked to its core. That demonstrates how absolutely beyond reproach he has become in certain cultural circles. And my colleague Jeff Blahar wrote about what's been turning into his this struggle session at CBS News. How have we wronged him? How could we let this possibly happen? Just wildly stunning. Then this question about the interview, the answer to one question being spliced into another one. Mind-boggling. Also, I now really want, it'd be really great if we could get completely unedited audio and video of the Whitaker interview with Harris, because in the first clip you played, those pauses were so pregnant, you would have thought P. Diddy had been around. Occasionally, I will listen to other podcasts, and there's nothing wrong with pausing to gather your thoughts. But every once in a while, someone will do that, and you're like, did the audio go out? Why am I not hearing anything, right? Harris has that. Bill, we have done so much. Probably half of our listeners were like, did something go wrong with my audio at that moment? So in the second one, he asked the question, it starts immediately, and it's just a complete answer. There are no pauses. So I just I'm left wondering, how different is the impression you get from what actually aired versus what was actually said? And again, I also keep going back on the issue of the transcript. Harris doesn't do a lot of interviews. This may well be the only time she gets asked tough questions, and CBS News still hasn't put out a transcript. Again, not a transcript of the report, which they did, which good, I'm glad they did that, but I'd really like to have a complete transcript of, Q, what the question was, A, and you want to take out the uhs, fine. Listeners, if you think I say a lot, every program, Greg edits out 300 uhs from me. That's that, I don't expect perfection from it, but you're speaking off the cuff. Sometimes you trip over your words and stuff like that. But it really just feels like there is this cohesive effort to polish and put the best possible version of Kamala Harris out there, and that's not what the job of CBS News is. Except everything happening over the Coates interview suggests that maybe it is how CBS News defines their job, that their job is not to report the news. The job is to let you know what you're supposed to think of these things. And you're supposed to like Coates and his new book.
Yeah, I want to know what the question was that they took the answer from.
Right.
To slap in there. I mean, they could ask you, hey, how do you feel about the West Virginia Senate race? Oh, I think it's going to be great. I think when all is said and done, it's going to turn out fantastically. And then they splice in the question, how do you think the Jets are going to do this year?
There you
I
go.
think it's going to be great.
Victory is certain. Yes, yeah. We shouldn't have these doubts. We shouldn't have these problems. Putting all the information out there clarifies it. Why are you a news organization? Why are you withholding things? If you want to splice out the, Madam Vice President, how are you doing? Like, fine. I don't, I don't need the nice small talk. How are your kids? All that. Just give me the relevant stuff. But I do think that a transcript definitely counts as relevant stuff.
I think you could safely say that we can't trust CBS's Middle East coverage at this point.
No, well, we can't. Some of us remember the Pajama Hadeen taking on Dan Rather and the Saronic eye. Like, in some ways, I'm having flashbacks to 2004, Greg. This is a weird, you would have thought that CBS News would have wanted to avoid something like that again. And clearly, they have no problems with this.
The more things change, the more they stay the same in all the wrong ways. But anyway, Jim, have a great day. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. Please subscribe to the podcast if you don't already. Tell your friends about us as well. Thanks for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a great Thursday. Join us again on Friday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.